Now, another extremely important feature of a good API is to provide pagination. So basically allowing the user to only select a certain page of our results in case we have a lot of results. So let's pretend that we have, for example, 1,000 documents in a certain collection, and we say that on each page we have 100 documents. So that would mean that we'd have 10 pages, right? So 10 times 100 is 1,000. And so based on that, how are we going to implement pagination using our query string? Well, we will use the page and the limit fields. So there will be a page field. Let's say we want page 2, and there will be a limit field. And this limit here basically means the amount of results that we want per page. And let's actually set it here only to 10. And of course, we need to correct this one here. It's not a comma, but an end. So page 2 and the limit 10. Now going back to the example of 1,000 results, if the limit is 10, so only 10 results per page, well, then we're going to have 100 pages. And in here, we are then displaying page number 2 of these 100 pages. Okay? Now, we need a way of implementing this using Mongoose. So let's take a look at how we could do that by going back to our code. So feature number 4, pagination. All right, and I will start by building an example query here, just like we did before. So let's say that the query is equal query. And now what kind of methods do we have in order to implement pagination? Well, the most useful one is skip. And I'm going to explain what it does in a second. So let's just put a random number here. So skip and limit. And let's put 10. And so this limit here is actually exactly the same as the limit that we define in the query string. So basically the amount of results that we want in the query. And then skip that we have here is the amount of results that should be skipped before actually querying data. All right, so again, this is just a placeholder here. Let's go back to this example that we have here. I'm just going to copy this query string here. And so let's say that the user wants page number 2 with 10 results per page. That means that results 1 to 10 are on page 1 and 11 to 20 are on page 2. Okay? And so what that means is that we want to skip 10 results before we actually start querying. Okay? So again, 1 to 10 are for page 1, and then 11 to 20 are for page 2, and so on and so forth. So 21 to 30 will be page 3, and so on and so forth. And so we need to skip 10 results in order to get to result number 11, right? So to result number 11, which will be the first one on page 2. Okay, and since it is page 2 that was requested, well, again, we need to skip 10 results before we actually start page 2. Okay, makes sense? And for example, if we requested page number 3, well, then of course 20 results would first have to be skipped. And so we will need some way of calculating this skip value here. So based basically on the page and the limit. Now you might ask why I do not directly ask for the skip value in the query string, but that's because for the user, this value here is kind of abstract. Okay, it's way easier to simply say, well, I want page number 1, or I want page number 5, or I want like page number 10. Okay, so for the user, it's much easier to not deal with skip values here and all that stuff. The user wants to have it easy and to just define a page. Now, before we can actually get started calculating the skip value, we need to first get the page and the limit from the query string, and we should also define some default values. Okay, and so that's basically because we still want to have pagination even if the user does not specify any page or any limit. Because, for example, let's say that we have 1 million results in our database, and then of course, when the user does the request, we want not simply show all of these 10 million results. So that wouldn't be very user-friendly, would it? And so I will define by default page number 1 and a limit of, let's say, 100. so that by default, when a user requests all of the tours, in this example, then he only gets 100 and not a million. All right. So the page is, of course, request.query.page. And I'm now going to multiply it by 1, which is just a nice trick to convert a string to a number. Okay, so maybe you noticed before that each time that we actually put a number in a query string, it will then be a string in our query object. And so we need to fix that simply by multiplying by 1. Okay, and then by default, we want page number 1. All right, and so this is a nice way in JavaScript of basically defining default values. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, right? Anyway, the limit is on rec.query.limit times 1 again to convert it, or the default of 100 that we just mentioned. So ideally, the user will only specify the page number that he requests and not even bother with the page limit. That's for more specific use cases. Okay, and now all we need to do is to then define, so to calculate basically that skip value that we just talked about here before. And the best way of doing that is to go back to an example. So again, let's say we are requesting page number 3 with the limit of 10. And we see here that for page number 3, the results are from 21 to 30. So it starts at result number 21, meaning that we need to skip 20 results. And 20 results is basically 2 times 10. So 2 times this limit. Okay? And from there, we actually start getting a formula. So 2 times 10 is basically 3 minus 1 times 10. And 3 is the page that we're on. And so that is our formula. So page minus 1, and so the previous page basically, times the limit. Okay? So I hope that made sense. Let's now replace these values here. Skip and limit of limit. Okay, so basically this number here is all the results that come before the page that we're actually requesting now. So again, if we are requesting page number 3, our results are going to start at page number 21. And so we want to skip 20 results before that. And so 20 results is because we have 2 pages times 10 results on each. And so, yeah, it's going to be the page that we just requested. So page here minus 1, so the previous page, times the number of results on each page. Okay, so that's the amount of documents that are going to be skipped. Okay, so I hope that made sense. Let's now go ahead and actually try this. And since we only have so few results here, we need to test it with a really small limit. So let's say that we only want 3 results per page, and let's actually start on page number 1. So let's send it, and indeed, now we only get 3 results, as you can see here. So these 3, let's see, so the Forest Hiker, the Sea Explorer, and the City Wanderer. Okay, let's try page number 2. And for some reason, Postman keeps jumping around each time that I change the URL. Anyway, now we have the Park Camper, the Snow Adventurer, and the Sports Lover. And so you start seeing that we actually now have different tours. Okay, and so we can kind of say that our pagination here is already working. So now the last page, and we have now the Northern Lights, the Wine Taster, and the Stargazer. All right. Now, what if we try to go to page number 4? We already know that we only have 9 tours. And so on page number 4, there should be nothing, right? So let's test that. And indeed, we get 0 results. But that is, of course, not ideal. Okay, and so let's now go ahead and fix that and basically kind of throw an error each time that the user selects a page that does not exist. Because that's basically the situation here. The user requested a page that simply does not exist. We don't have enough results to have 4 pages with 3 results. So let's now do that. And this will actually only happen when there is a page on the query. And so let's actually create this if statement here. So if request.query.page, only in this case we will test if we are skipping more tours than we actually have. So let's get the amount of tours. So number of tours is equal to, and now we're actually going to learn a new method. So a new method that is on the tour model, which is called count documents. Okay, and as the name says, this is going to return the number of documents. All right, now actually it's going to return a promise, but we then await the promise, and so it will then come back with the result of the amount of tours. Okay, and so if the number of documents that we skip is greater than the number of documents that actually exists, well, then that means that the page does not exist. All right, that makes sense? So if skip is greater than the number of tours, and for now what I'm going to do here is to throw a new error. Okay, so throw a new error. This page does not exist. Now, why am I throwing an error here? Well, simply because if I throw an error here in the try block, which we are currently in, it will then automatically and immediately move on to the catch block. And it will then send back this 404 kind of fail message. Okay? And so that's what we want for now. Just keep in mind that we will implement much better error handling a bit later in the course, and actually right in the next section. Okay? But for now, let's just keep it simple, throw this error here, in case that we're trying to skip more documents that we actually have. Okay? So this is the right case. Let's send it here. And that's not the result that I expected. So let's go back. So right now, our page is 4 and the limit is 3. So the skip here would be 3 times 3, so 9, okay? And the number of tours is 9 as well. And so skip is not greater than the number of tours, and therefore we don't get this error. So what we need to do is to set it to greater or equal. Okay, and so that should now work. And that takes a long time. And indeed, now we get the fail status here and the 404. For some reason, this error is not showing up here, which it actually should. Well, but don't worry about that. That's not really important. What matters is that it did actually enter our catch block and then send back this 404 response. Everything else we're going to implement a bit later. Okay, and that's actually it. So that's all the methods that we're going to add to our query. And so when we finally reach the next line of code here, our query will then be awaited and return with the tours. Okay, and at this point, our query might actually look something like this, something like, well, what do we have here? We have sort, select. So we might have sort, and then some select there. We have also skip. We have limit as well. And so that's a really kind of a big query. And again, what allows us to do that is that each of these methods here will always return a new query that we can then chain on the next method and the next method and the next method until we finally await the query so that it can actually give us our documents. Okay, so let's get rid of all these comments. And yeah, that's it for now for these features. We're just going to add one more in the next lecture, but that one is going to be a bit different than these. It's not going to use one of these query methods. All right, so I hope that over the last couple of lectures, you really learned the ins and outs of querying data with Mongoose. So of course, all of these methods that we used are not only useful for these features that we implemented here. You can really create all kinds of queries that you can imagine for all kinds of applications. So I showed you all the techniques here in this context of these different API features, but of course, you're going to be able to use them all over your applications in the future. Okay? So I hope that was fun for you, and if it was, then let's move on now right to the next one. See you!